Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Tracy Cook. I'm the online media manager for ModernAnalyst.com, the premier community for business analysts. I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar entitled Embracing Decision Model Standards for Business Analysts. Today's featured speaker is Barbara von Halle, the co-inventor of the decision model and Sapiens DECISION. Today's webinar is approximately 60 minutes long, including the question and answer session at the end. Please be sure to submit your questions in advance using the question feature of the GoToWebinar software. I'd like to say thank you to Sapiens DECISION for sponsoring this event. And now it is my pleasure to welcome Barbara von Halle. Barbara, please take it away.
Okay, thank you very much, Tracy, and thank you to Modern Analyst. I always enjoy talking to Modern Analyst audiences. So let me just start out by saying that this is a very exciting time for decision modeling. When I first wrote the decision model book, I really wondered who was going to do this. It was a new model. We had practiced it a little bit. I wondered if business people would do it, or data modelers would do it, or process modelers would do it. And it does seem that the majority of our decision modelers tend to be business analysts working with business people. So this is very exciting. Now, today, there is an IT standard for decision modeling, and it's called the OMG DMN. And the good news is that we at KPI before, and then Sapiens now, have been creating decision models prior to this standard for over 7 years. And that's important because our clients, which are among the largest corporations in the world, thinking banks, mortgage, insurance companies, have proven that decision modeling brings great advantages to both business and IT. So we are really grateful that they took a leap of faith with us when we started paving the way to decision modeling and to bring it to where it is today. I think most amazing is that we have seen decision models change both business and IT in ways we never even anticipated. I'm going to share that with you. So by the end of this webinar, you will understand the magnitude of what our clients are already doing today, and the reason that's important is this will give you the confidence to consider decision modeling at your organization because it's being done everywhere. It's just now can be done with a new standard, the DMN standard. So if you're not already doing so and you're thinking about it, you can get some confidence from learning about our case studies and client studies, one of which I'm going to share with you today. So you may already know my background, but the pieces that are relevant to this webinar is that I started in data architecture before there was software for the relational model. And why is that important? To me, that's very important because I learned about the stability of a formal model, the relational model, from IBM before the relational model was really available. And it was a model for representing a somewhat invisible asset. And that invisible asset in the 1960s and 70s was data. And that the new invisible asset today is decision logic. We had it all over the place in our architecture. We had different ways of capturing it, but it had no model of its own, just like data didn't way back in the early days. And I had been active in the business rule space, producing several books about that, but the culmination of all of that, my relational model experience, my business rule experience, and even some of my academia, is the decision model, because it actually is a combination of all of those, and that's what I'm going to point out to you today. I'm going to point out to you that DMN is fabulous. We're really excited about it. We intend to support it. We're supporting part of it now, but I want to show you some of the pieces that are missing that you can use. You can actually use those pieces on your DMN models to get better quality models, and that's what we do. And so today the next step is here with DMN, and so what is DMN and how it's different from what we've been doing is what I want to cover today, and how you can actually leverage both, because it turns out they're similar, but they have important differences, and each one can help the other one. So there are pieces from each that can be added to each other. So it's a very interesting time to be here. So let me introduce you to Sapiens. I think a lot of people in our space are not familiar with Sapiens. Sapiens is this is the corporate identity of Sapiens. What's important for you to know, because I didn't know all that much about them a few years ago, is they are a global company. They have 150 customers globally. They are publicly traded, and they have offices in North America, UK, Europe, and the Asia Pacific. They have revenue in 2015 of 179 million with a profit of 22 million. And the good news is they have a very strong cash position and no debt. So if you're thinking about decision modeling software, Sapiens is definitely a company to look at. The product I'm going to talk to you about you may not be familiar with, even though it's several years old, but the Sapiens Corporation has been around for quite a while. So what is Sapiens Decision? Sapiens Decision is a new part of Sapiens Corporate, and it's specifically here, it says it includes the software and methodology for business users or business analysts to manage the full life cycle of decision models. It talks about regulatory policy and operational decisions, but basically it's through the decision model. So you see that on the right-hand side. We've been using the decision model for many years now, and Sapiens Decision was specifically designed to do that. We used to do our models manually with Visio and Excel, and even now people are doing DMN models with Visio and Excel, and by the way, that works. It's not as good as software, but it certainly works. You can get the models down, you can find errors in them, and then you can turn them over to IT. Our software, what we do is we go all the way through to automation. So our models are not necessarily, quote, handed over to IT. They do go through IT, but by the time they get to IT, there's been lots of things done to them, including all the errors have been found and they've been tested. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that. That's a little bit unique. Our customers are some of the largest companies, as I mentioned, in the world. These are the kinds of benefits they've gotten from using our model in Sapiens software. And so the good thing is we're a new business unit more or less for a couple of years, but we have strong revenue growth, global footprint. We have a huge R&D team, which is not only looking at evolving the decision model, but also DMN. And Sapiens today is a member of the DMN committee. Larry Goldberg and myself, we were members for 1.0, and Sapiens continues that membership in order to bring to the table of the OMG the experience that we have had, so that OMG's DMN actually gets, can advance quicker than maybe if we weren't on the team. So the first part is navigating and leveraging the unique world of DMN and TDM, because prior to DMN 1.0 there was only one decision modeling possibility out there, and that was the decision model. So this is even more timely because now they finalized the DMN 1.1, and it's also timely because there are many thought leaders out there who are debating online whether DMN or TDM is the best decision modeling notation to use. So that makes the world very interesting. Of course, you probably expect that Sapiens and I would be biased towards TDM because that's what we've been doing, and we have software that that supports it from start to finish. But we're also very excited about the current standardization of decision modeling in DMN, and I'm going to share with you why I think it's really, really significant. They're also excited about being able to be a software platform that can blend both TDM and DMN in the same tool, and that I will share with you. Part of that is happening today, so I can talk to you about that. And at the end of the webinar, I can talk to you or mention the things that are coming up in the very near future, if you're interested in both of them. But let's start now with what you folks are doing. If you're all new to decision modeling, if you've never heard of it, and this is what I was doing before I sat down with the decision model book. So before decision modeling, most organizations adopted a business rules approach, and my company did 80% of its business was business rules approach. And you're familiar with this, I think. Business people are the experts. You folks, the business analysts, listen to them, read their documents, and then translate them in a format that's supposed to be more concise and understandable, both to business people and IT. And it comes out to look something like this page. It's a spreadsheet or it's a database. It's a list of requirements or rules, and they're kind of organized in different ways, and then it gets submitted to IT. And then what does IT do with it? It's a requirements document. IT then deploys it for testing, and then people test it, and you find errors in the rules, and then the errors have to be corrected, and then it's redeployed for testing, and then we test and find more errors, and it goes on and on. And I can say this from personal experience. This is time-consuming, this is error-prone, it's costly, and it's not really overly successful. And what was important to me, or even disappointing to me, is I think that this is the heart of any system. This is the heart of a business process. This is the thinking and decisioning that's going on behind the process or the system, and it's buried everywhere, and it's error-prone. And I sat down and said, there must be a better way. And that was when I went back to the relational model and started saying, we've had this problem before, but with a different asset. So let me present to you an actual case study. This is one of our clients, and this may look a lot like your projects. They were wrestling with a large project. They had 2 business analysts who had carefully collected from documents and from business people 15,000 rules. This was actually a compliance requirement, and it took them 12 weeks. And they attempted to organize them in a meaningful way and then give it to IT, but they finally they realized that their documentation was incomplete, inconsistent, unsustainable, and not reusable, not even a place to consider changes going forward, and so they gave up. So what I will do, I'll come back in about a half an hour or so to this particular case study and tell you what we did with this case study, how long. You'll be surprised. It just took us a few weeks. I think it was 3 weeks to turn this into a set of decision models that were already tested. I will hold on to that because that's a real case study that didn't happen all that long ago. So let's look at DMN. Even though DMN came second and the decision model came first, I want to look at DMN because it's a standard and that's important, and of course it's a better approach than what you just saw from a business rules approach. So I want to get a feeling for what you guys know already. So here's our first polling question. Were you familiar with the OMG decision model and notation before this webinar? So I think Tracy will open up the poll and then close it down and give us the results. Okay, so Tracy, is the polling over?
Yes, Barbara. We have 24% that said yes, and then 76% said no.
Okay, so most people have not heard about it. That's really interesting. This is interesting because there are some people who have had experience and some people who are just hearing about it for the first time. But the most important thing, I wanted to make this statement. I believe the decision model and notation, DMN, may be one of the most significant OMG standards to date. And I say that for 5 reasons. I am really excited about it. I'm excited to be at the beginning of it. But here are the 5 reasons, and some of you may not realize because you haven't gone through the last few years where we've been fighting for decision modeling. First, DMN is an IT community standard. And in fact, everyone on the OMG team was an IT professional, if I consider myself an IT professional too. This is very good because it paves the way to IT acceptance. I'll be honest with you, the most resistance we got over the last few years in introducing decision modeling to our clients, business people loved it, business analysts loved it, but the IT groups resisted it because they were asking us, what is this thing? We're not familiar with it. Where did this come from? It came from a book. You know, who endorses this? And so having an IT standard now brings IT into the conversation in a very important role. There is software to be bought, and there are, skills to be learned, and it now is a endorsed set of skills and software. So second, DMN is a standard for a practice, by the way, that isn't new. Okay, because I've already told you that we have many success stories, so you can proceed with less risk and more confidence because it's not brand new like data modeling was at the time that the relational model came out. The third one is that both TDM and DMN elevate decision management and modeling to a legitimate IT space. What does that mean? That means there's a new kind of software that people can develop and utilize, and a new set of skill sets that will be recognized as job requirements. And the last 2 you might not be familiar with, but I'm going to talk to them a little bit throughout the presentation. Both TDM and DMN ushers in an era of living decision models as instruments of change. And I've seen this, and I didn't really understand how well this was going to work. It means that decision models need not be just a new kind of requirement that you turn over like those spreadsheets to IT, and then they start doing something with it. By living models, it means all the changes in our clients, all the changes going forward to these models are made to the models. The changes are never made to spreadsheets. They're never made to program code. So, and sometimes the automation of them, depending on if you're using software, we have adapters for different target technologies. The automation can be fairly smooth. But the point is that the business people, business analysts, business experts have the opportunity to say, this is where we make all the changes. And if you follow the discipline I'm going to share with you, it will be so easy to make changes going forward compared to what you do today. And I'm going to end up with the door to future innovation, because the decision model has been the instigation for yet another model coming out, which has been presented a couple of times. So I'll just leave you with that thought when we get to the end. So here is the DMN story. It is a standard created and maintained by the OMG, and the OMG is an IT group. And these were the original participating companies, and of course if you look at the names of these companies, it's very interesting, some of the large well-known companies who are here, so you can expect products from these companies if they don't have them already. We had given some presentations on decision modeling, as did James Taylor, and then the OMG was interested and started a subcommittee. Larry Goldberg and I were on the first DMN 1.0 subcommittee, and now Sapiens is continuing that legacy. So let me introduce you to the basics of DMN. So what is DMN modeling? Okay, the DMN spec is like 174 pages, but the only pages we're interested in is the modeling notation for business analysts. There's a lot of things in there about the meta model and IT concerns for products, but this is basically what we're interested in. This page shows three aspects of DMN notation. The first is on the left, and it's labeled as DMN's integration with business processes, or BPMN. So if you look at this BPMN model, the second task contains a tabular shape in the upper left-hand corner, and that simply indicates that that task calls a decision model that's going to make this decision, which is something about routing. So the details of how to make that decision are not in the process model anymore. The way that all that comes out of that task is the answer to the decision, and the process continues. That means you have separate decision models. You can change them separate from the process model, and then you have a visibility to how the decisions are being made. On the right-hand side are two other parts of the DMN notation. It has the three parts. The second is on the top right, and it's called a Decision Requirements Diagram, or DRD, and it basically bridges the gap between the process model and the details. So in a DRD, the rectangles are decisions. So in this DRD, we have three decisions, and they're actually connected. You can see they're connected together. So that means that one decision creates an output that is used by another one. The DRD can include other kinds of shapes. So here you see this shape at the bottom, or the oval kind of, and that basically represents data coming into these two decisions that are shown in this diagram. So that you'll have more than just decision shapes in your DRD, which is different from TDM, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. The third aspect is the decision logic on the bottom. So decision logic is, for each of these rectangles, we have the details for how the decision is made. And here, this one happens to be a decision table. And let's see what to note about this. DMN supports several kinds of decision tables and how to format them. And this one, as you can see, has three conditions: employment status, country, and age, and it has a conclusion of eligibility. And so, and by the way, DMN, I'm going to talk to this too, DMN allows decisions that are not made by logic or decision tables. You can have various kinds of decisions expressed in your rectangles. You can have natural language, you can have programming language, you can have a formula, you can have all kinds of things in there. So decision tables are only one kind of decision that you can put in DMN, which is very, very useful, because TDM is only logic decisions, and because we based it on the science of logic and relational, etc., but it doesn't today handle other kinds of decisions. So you can see where they're the same, but they're different also. I just want to point out, when you look at DMN examples, these cells where it says unemployed and not UK and less than 18, these cells are sort of free form, and so you can put different things in there, and there's guidance in the paper if you want to use their language. You're going to see in TDM we separate all the different pieces of logic so that we can validate that they make sense, and we can find out if your logic is complete or not complete, and I'm going to show you that. So those are some of the differences you're going to see, but you can understand that DMN gives you a wider range of decisioning. TDM today gives you one type of decision. It's the most common type, but TDM has the science to see if everything is correct and good and there are no gaps in your logic. So you can kind of picture how you could apply that science to your DMN models, because DMN doesn't have any of that science. And so that's what we're really excited about. And by the way, that's what we did when we started with TDM. We manually applied all these science principles to make sure everything was good before we turned them over to IT. So it's not like taking a step backwards. That's exactly how we got started, is manually doing things, and then software came along that supported how we could do that. So now that you understand a little bit about DMN, I'm going to point out a couple pages on TDM, but I want to say the most important difference is that today TDM is a model only for logic-based decisions. That could change. So it's based on the body of science that defines first-order logic, and that's useful for finding logic errors because there's a science for doing it. So therefore, when you look at the TDM notation, you will see how it separates pieces, because we want to validate that every clause makes sense with the conditions, that there aren't any gaps, there aren't any errors, and we want to do that up front. We don't want to wait for testing to find the gaps in the logic. There's no reason to do that because there is a science. So how many of you, I would like to know how many of you were you familiar with the decision model before this webinar? And then Tracy will tell us who we are, how much we know.
And Barbara, we have 29% that says yes and 71% that said no.
Okay, so it sounds like between DM and TDM, this audience is kind of new to both of them, which is interesting but not unusual. It's a good place to be, actually. So let me just spend the time on the decision model. The decision model, because I came up with it, the decision model started with the science. It started with the principles for what such a model should do. And then we created a notation for it and methodology, and then we created software for it. So the reason I mentioned that is these graphics here can be anything as long as they expose the logic and we can find the errors. So they could look just like DMN, for example. But this is we have three parts to our notation, just like DMN. We connect to BPMN models. We connect with this octagon. That's fine. We can use the decision table icon that you just saw. And this is our high-level diagram. So it is similar to the DRD of DMN, but it's a little bit different. And we don't need to go through those differences right now. And one of the reasons we went with the logic-only decisions is because it is a science, but the second reason is most of the decisions that you struggle with in business today through your business rules approaches are, in fact, based on logic, right? The first-order logic from conditions leading to conclusions are the most prevalent form of business rules and the foundation of most regulatory requirements and operational decisions, like whether to pay a claim or whether someone's eligible for a mortgage. They're all based on logic. So there's a huge universe out there that's kind of sort of a little messy without decision modeling. So TDM also has tables. It has a detailed level. This is the structural level. It has the tables too, just like DMN has, but we have only one kind of table, and it's called a rule family, but that doesn't matter. And we have conditions. You notice if you look in these cells, I have an is and an off. I have an is and a yes. I have as greater than and a 10%. So we separate our cells so that we can make sure that the is makes sense for the condition, and the off and on are things that should be in there, and that I'm not missing anything when I'm testing it. So the reason we break things up is so we can find errors and deliver perfect decision models. A couple of other things. We have only one conclusion column. In the DMN, you saw one conclusion column, but you can have many. And it's these conclusion columns that tie these structures together. So if you have 3 conclusion columns, it gets very messy and it's going to be very difficult to maintain. So all of our clients use only one conclusion column, and if they need another column, they create another table. Let's see what else to tell you. We also have very rigorous logic. We follow first order logic best practices. We don't allow ors or otherwises or buts. DMN allows you to do all of that. We don't use these because those of you who have been programmers in the past know that these are a problem. I mean, even or alone, if you have something that says A or B, you can mean A or B, or maybe both, or you can mean A or B and definitely not both. So we get rid of these very fuzzy things up front, and when people talk with these words, we break it down into better statements that we can put into our decision table so that we don't get errors. And also, by the way, there are different forms of normalization that we've come up with or documented in our book. They're not that hard, but the point is we take logic and we break it into normalized pieces and we build our model with them. So it's not just a notation. It's actually a little bit more scientific, I guess. So I mention this because I want to show you how to use this on your DMN models. That's one of the whole points of this webinar. So we have 3 different sets of principles for detecting errors in our models, and these include things like that are located here. Overlaps in your logic, for example, gaps in your logic, unnecessary redundancies. I'm going to show you that because that's a real pain in the neck. Broken links among the connections, circular logic, expressions that just don't make sense, like you're trying to add some numbers to a character field, and then violations of normal form. And if those of you who go out and buy the book, all of the principles are in chapter 12. And over the years, in 7 years, we haven't changed those principles or added to them very much. They have, been pretty solid because they're based on a very old science. So the question I ask here, is this a big deal? And I think it is, because if I think about to the data world and look at what our clients are doing today with the decision models, the biggest payback is in the future. Future updates, if you want all the updates to be made to your models, they're easy if you follow these integrity principles, because when you follow the principles, you will create decision models where each piece of logic goes in one place, only one place, and the right place, in the same way that normalization does that for data. So that gives you a lot of disciplined, orderly pieces to your decision model, and it's very easy to automate, it turns out. So the good news is that our models are truly happening today, and this page lists some of the applications that are powered by production decision models using the decision model at our clients around the world, and I'm not going to go through them, but if you are familiar with these, you know that they are very complex, yet the decision models brought simplicity and stability to these types of applications. But I want to make you think about something. There's more to look forward to, and I've mentioned this before. What you may not hear elsewhere is that decision models offer the opportunity for your organization to reshape the partnership between business and IT. And when you do that, you can significantly break current change barriers. And this is beyond our expectations, so I'm actually going to explain to you why that happens, and then we're going to go back to that first case study. So this page says, breaking barriers begins with moving the line in the sand. The line in the sand is the line between business and business analysts and IT. So what it means is giving you folks a tool, which means a decision model, to create a decision model, validate it or against principles or look for errors before you hand it over to IT, because then it's a much more stable deliverable. Using enterprise software, you can actually generate test cases and actually test your decision models against test cases that are generated directly from the model, and then you turn it over to IT. So this is what our customers are doing now. They actually have this whole non-technical role here that do the models, validate them against principles, test them, and then keep doing this and turn it over to IT. And they're technology independent, so they can execute in any target technology. So we were astonished at how quickly this happens. So let me show you what happened in that real-world project. Remember this one? Let me show you what happened. Okay. We started from scratch with decision models, although to be honest with you, we started with the 15,000 rules, which we wouldn't normally do. We would just start from scratch with sessions with business people, but we already had these spreadsheets. It took us 3 weeks with 2 analysts to reduce those 15,000 rules to 24 decision models, looking like the one on the right there, that's taken from Sapiens Decision, and we had 149 of those rule family views. So those are the green tablet shapes. We had 149 of those in total. It took them 3 weeks. And then based on that, we found all the errors, and we generated 35,000 test cases that could be tested. And we did all of that in 3 weeks. And IT didn't get involved until it was tested. And it was tested because it can generate its own test cases. You can manually generate your test cases or import test cases. So this is a significant jump forward for both business and IT because the time frames for change are significantly shorter. And I think it was Freddie Mac that went on record talking about how quickly they were able to make changes due to Storm Sandy compared to previous disasters like Katrina, which had the same number of changes. It was 90% faster. So this smashes the change barrier, and it happens at every one of our clients. This is not made up. This is not an unusual case, and it's why decision modeling has already had an impact on major corporations. At the end, I'll tell you how you can get in touch with us if you want to talk about some of these clients, to see if some of them are in your industry, and so you can learn a little bit more. So now I move on to where the rubber meets the road. If you want to be doing DMN models, and that's a good thing to do, and you want to supercharge them, in other words, you want to make them better than just taking the DMN spec and filling in the cells and handing them over to IT. So, so I will show you how to do that, because you do it by applying them to some of the TDM principles, and then they become not just a notation or a picture, but a complete model, like a relational model is a complete model of data. And I'm going to walk you through 2 examples to show the kinds of errors you can detect. One is the detection of missing logic, and the other is the detection of unnecessary and costly redundant logic. And because DMN doesn't have this foundation, again, you'll have to do it manually, but that's okay. That's how we all got started. That's how we all got started, even with the decision model. So how many, I would like to find out, are you working on a current decision modeling project now? And we'll see what Tracy says. Are we? How many people, what percentage?
Robert, we have a 23% that said yes and 77% that said no.
Okay. So that's interesting. We seem to be in the 70s, 20s for all of the questions. That's interesting. Okay, so let's get started. Let's take a look at this particular, this is a fun one actually. This is an example. Example 1, we're going to look for incomplete logic, and it's a fictitious table. I just made it easy for you. It's a conclusion. See, the conclusion is to determine for a job offer whether the work location is acceptable. Okay, and this is, we're doing this for a friend. This person has been lucky enough to get lots of job opportunities, and this is one criteria that they're going to use. And so if we look at this table, this could be a DMN table, or this happens to be TDM because we've broken the cells up so we can see them better. You would just put them in free form, but you can still eyeball them. And there it has 2 conditions. It has the work time from home percentage and home to office distance in miles. Notice the column headings are business words. They're not what, the names of fields in a file or a database. We don't care about that. The business people don't care about that. This is what they want to call them, and so we let them do that. It's interesting how they actually love being able to do that. So what we have on the right-hand side is a glossary, and that's one thing TDM, it kind of has bits and pieces, but for our decision models, and I'm going to tell you to do this for yours, we have to put every single column heading in a glossary with its business name, a business data type, whatever they want to think of it, business values, and a business definition, so we know how to interpret the decision models that they're doing. So, for instance, how would we read row 3? Here we have row 3. We're not going to talk about rule pattern today, but what we say is if the work time from home percentage is between 10 and 40, and by the way, that includes the endpoints, and the distance to the office is less than or equal to 40, then we're saying that the work location acceptable indicator is acceptable. That means that because I can work from home, or our friend can work from home, between 10 and 40%, then this is an acceptable commute on the times that I don't have to commute. Where looks like our friend says, well, if the work from home is between 50 and 100, I don't care how far I am from the office because I'm only going to go there 50% of the time, perhaps. So this is basically how they set up their logic. So if I look at the glossary, this is what they tell. These are the 4 sentences that our friend says, and so luckily for us, they just fit into 4 rows, and we fill out the 4 rows. We have to ask them what otherwise means, because when they say otherwise or buts, we have to say, excuse me, what does that mean exactly? So typically what we would do in the past is just turn it over to IT, and they would create code, and we would start testing it for errors. But there's no reason that we can't find incompleteness, because all of these column headings are in our glossary, and they tell me what the value, it tells me what those values are. So I have to cover all of those values in my table or I'm not complete. So if we look over here, we can see here that we have to cover 0 to 100%. Well, it was a percentage, that's no great shakes, but you can imagine that we'd say the same thing about the miles and maybe the indicator here. We would have other values. So we have to just go down this column then and say, well, are there any numbers that are missing between 0 and 100? And there actually is. We have a gap greater than 40 and less than 50. We have a whole gap in there. We don't have to wait for testing for that. We can see that right away, and then we can go back and say we need another row. We need something about 40 and 50. I don't know what this operator is right here, and what do these consider office to, home to office distance miles? Is there something in there? And is that acceptable or not acceptable? So we are constantly, when we find an error in one of our decision tables, we correct it, and then we have to apply the principles again because we might have introduced some errors. So for a decision model to be approved, and by the way, this is very dynamic. People do this in meetings, they do it at lunchtime, it goes on and on and on, not a long time. It's much faster than waiting for testing. But at the time we say this whole model is approved, the glossary and the tables must be synchronized. And in this case, it must be complete. They must be all complete. If it finds out that it's not complete, either the table is incomplete or there's something wrong with the glossary. Maybe it wasn't supposed to cover those values. So we have to go back and forth between the glossary and the tables, which is something that DMN doesn't come with naturally. But I really recommend that you folks do that because it'll be much faster for you to do your decision models. Now let's see if we can find some irrelevant conditions. This is one of my favorite ones. This is actually taken from a real-world lookup table. And it's a conclusion for max LTV, and this means it's the maximum loan-to-value amount between the value of a mortgage versus the value of the property that the mortgage is for. So example row 1 says if the purpose of the mortgage is for a primary residence and the type of property is a 1-unit structure and it doesn't have any secondary financing on it, then the maximum loan-to-value is 95%. And so that's how we read all of these. So that's pretty straightforward. Now we are looking for unnecessary redundancy. I just happen to know there is some here. And this was an actual creation at a client site. But we don't use the business glossary for this one. We're going to eyeball the table itself. So one of the rigors of TDM is that every single condition column that has something filled in it must actually be relevant to the conclusion. We don't want any irrelevant conditions. Why test something that has absolutely no influence on the conclusion? So the error in this table is not that easy to find, but I'll show you where it is. By the way, we would do these on whiteboards, and when business people would find these errors, they would win pieces of chocolate. So you found one, you found one. So here, something odd about row 1 and row 6. They both test for primary residence. They both are for a 1-unit property, but row 1 says it has no secondary financing and row 2 says it does have secondary financing, and they both have the same conclusion. So this is very interesting. It does appear that the secondary financing on the property has absolutely no influence on the conclusion. It's totally irrelevant. So we can, what can we do? We can get rid of that, we can unpopulate the secondary financing column for those 2 rows. But first we have to ask the business people, is this correct? Or maybe the 95 is a typo, right? But they say, no, yeah, that's really weird, it doesn't really matter. So, and by the way, sometimes if we're doing this manually, we can just resort the rows and columns and look for things that are irrelevant over and over and over again until we find some. And, but if we get rid of those, look, we have to now apply principles about redundant rows. And so when we get rid of the secondary financing, we find out that row 1 and row 6 are exactly the same. So now we have an entirely redundant row. And of course, we have to, again, make sure that we're correct and with the business people. But you can see what's happening is we're actually looking at it because there's a science behind logic. And we can take a look at it. We don't want to add unnecessary things to our models because then we have to maintain them. We don't want to have gaps. We don't want to have any of this stuff, and we want to find it all before we turn it over to IT. We don't have to go through this months and months and months of testing. So when we do that, we end up with fewer rows. So what you will find is as you apply this kind of rigor to your tables and then to your models, you usually end up with less logic than you started with because you started with either people talking to you or a document, and they're not really written with any rigor. So it's kind of like data. You just throw data in a table and then you look and see, you know, where your redundant data is. So finally we end up with this one. We end up with 5 rows, and this one row was 1 and 6, and we don't need secondary financing at all. And it's much straighter to see. You can tell right away that if you have a primary residence and a 1 unit, secondary financing means nothing. You didn't see that in the first version of it because that's how the business people gave it to you. So we only have time for these 2 kinds of error detections in this webinar, but here's where I want to give you some ideas for what to do, how to supercharge your DMN models or even your TDM models if you don't have software. So step 1 is to create a glossary and establish a glossary administrator who is in charge of making sure all those column headings, you know, everybody adheres to them and are using the same ones. Make them business friendly. It's not for IT. IT will take that and correlate that to real data sources. We actually have decision models that are correlated to more than one data source. The decision model doesn't have to change. The column headings are the same to the business people, but when they go and execute it in one business unit and another business unit, they use different data sources. That's a huge savings. The structural principles we talked a little bit about, you want to make sure your cells conform to the headings using the glossary, make sure there's only one conclusion, and you don't have any irrelevant conditions. You saw that. Then we have some integrity principles to make sure that you cover all the domain values and you don't have any duplicate rows. If you just do those few things, and they won't take you a whole lot of time, you will find 90% of the errors before you go to testing, which is really nice. Okay, so I also said I would talk to you about a roadmap for charting your organization's decision model adoption and maturity. So let me just ask my last question is, are you interested in decision modeling and management software such that this kind of a roadmap would be helpful to you?
And Barbara, we have 80% that said yes and 20% that said no.
Okay, that's interesting. Okay, so what you're telling me is we have a lot of you folks who don't have experience and are not familiar with either of these notations, but that software would be interesting to understand. This is an interesting place for us at Sapiens to be, because we were the first ones out there with decision modeling software. And so our software has been tailored by our clients. We have a client review board, and they tell us the requirements that they have. Now, DMN is on the market, and it's different, as you see. And so we had to look at the full range of software that we expect to be out there. Some of the products coming out are part of BPMS vendors, some are standalone tool vendors, and by the way, there should be many more coming in the future. So we had created this roadmap a while ago, and don't look at the blue chart on the left. It's got all the details. You can look at that as a reference, but the levels on the right are interesting because I have a place where I say DMN is fine or TDM, and then where right today TDM is needed because of some of the reasons that I mentioned to you. So if your target level for your organization is level 0, which is called unmanaged, it means you don't want to manage decision models, so you don't need any tool. That's an easy one. Your level 1 organization says, I want to see my decision models. I want to draw those pictures. I want to create those tables, and I want to see them, but I don't need to execute them. I'm going to draw them, and I'm going to turn them over to IT, and they're going to automate them, and I'm going to, it's going to be a new requirement I hand over to IT. There's nothing wrong with that, by the way. It still will be better than any business rules approach you're doing today. And I say that because I came up with business rules approaches. It still will be better. So that's why DMN, it's a sketching, it's a notation, or even TDM, whatever works for you. So it will still be faster and better than what you're doing. At level 2, your organization wants to be agile, which means you want your product, you want your decision models to go straight through easily to automation with limited IT in the middle. IT will correlate it to data sources and to the target technology, but it's limited. It might be on a project basis to like one technology. So I'm kind of looking at the people who are on the DMN team. Some of them are also business rule engine vendors. It's likely that they would allow their decision modeling tool to generate to their target technology, but they may not do so for their competitor, right? But if that's what you need on a project by project basis, that might be fine. And again, that can be DMN or TDM. At level 3, it's really your organization wants enterprise adoption, which means you want governance across like business units and different parts of your organization. You want different communities of decision models, maybe some for your consumer products and some for your pharmaceutical products perhaps, and they have different models. And you want to deploy your models to any technology in the enterprise. And so level 3 means that every decision model must be executable in any target technology. We have clients at level 3 who have the same decision model, and they deploy to Drools and to, let's say, to iLog or ODM. So they have, they can do that, and any changes are made to the model, and then they redeploy. And so TDM and Sapiens Decision has mostly been involved with level 3 or higher organizations. Levels 4 and 5 are getting really interesting. Sapiens Decision is moving into that, and that is where the organization can change the results of their decisions and save them. And save them so they can do analysis and make their decisions better in the future by looking at how they've made them in the past. So they can look at, failing mortgages and what conditions they were looking at and what conditions they didn't look at. And so we get more and more advanced here. And there is a little bit of a challenge with DMN. The way DMN is going to deploy to target technology is it has its own new language, and it's called FEEL, F as in father, E-E-L. And so it relies on target technology vendors to adopt that model in order to deploy. But I'm going to talk a little bit more about that, about what Sapiens is going to do about that in 2 more pages because we're almost finished. I want to just talk about an intriguing future. In the beginning, we had data models and process models and decisions. Now we have decision models, and I would like to see more sophistication happening. But as I think that as business and technology professionals become accustomed to decision models, the models will become the very foundation of the business, and then they will become more and more sophisticated in how the business makes decisions. And that has already started because we were on a research project with IBM Research where we took the basic ideas of the decision model and all the scientific principles, and we applied them to complex event detection, which is, detecting fraud, cell phone fraud, or money laundering, or in the biggest sphere, terrorist things happening where different events add up to something much bigger than an individual event. And we've already been doing that. We've already published that model and presented it at some conferences. So in the future, I think we'll see more complex decisioning for things like that, and I think it will be based on some scientific principles similar to the decision model, and maybe it will be the DMN. So I have just 2 things to share with you. So what is Sapiens Decision Roadmap? What are they going to be doing? They are going to be increasing DMN support. Today, any TDM models that are already in Sapiens Decision can be rendered with a push of a button into DMN notation so you can see what they look like in DMN notation. The next step is to be able to sketch models from start to finish in either. So you could start with DMN or you can start with TDM, and that's coming shortly. And then they have gone on record to say they will support the DMN expression language provided that the target vendors actually adopt it and the clients want it. Our clients are using adapters, so if that works, that's fine. But if people start going with the field language, they will support that also. So if you're interested in any of these, Sapiens will share you the details of their roadmap along with timeframes if you need to sign an NDA and have a meeting. And so I hope I gave you some insights into the two decision modeling options and how you can use one to improve the other. And you can probably imagine the productivity improvements if using software can find all the errors in a matter of seconds, and you can fix them and generate test cases, etc. But in the meantime, if this has been interesting to you, here's a couple of places you can go. If you want to know more about the decision model and its principles, we have a primer on the decision model. They have the websites here. I have on the next page, I have a little easier way to get to it. If you want a demo of Sapiens Decision, which would include the DMN support, the rendering today, and the TDM support, you can come to a conference, or you can contact people at info.sapiensdecision.com, and they have a less than 2-hour demo to show you some examples and actually can give you some statistics from potentially clients in your own industry, if that would be helpful. And the one we like the most, and this was kind of scary at the beginning, is just pick a decision to model. If you guys want to really see your stuff in a decision model, contact Sapiens, and we have teams of people that will do what we call a day of discovery. We'll take some of your complex process models and decisions and pick a couple and model them and bring it back and show you what they look like. That's kind of an exciting thing to do. We have a whole team that just does that. And now I'm finished. I open it up for questions and answers, but I did put some contact information. If you want the TDM primer, it's on the sapiensdecision.com website. Instead of typing in all those things, I couldn't find it originally, so I just Googled a primer for the decision model Sapiens, and it popped up. The TDM templates are still on the KPI website. They will be moving to Sapiens Decision, but they're in the download section today. And then, of course, for a demo, just go to info@sapiensdecision.com. And I also put my email message there. If I don't get to answer all your questions, or you come up with questions or just curious things you want to know about, please feel free to send me an email, and I will, if I can't answer it, I will send it to the right person in Sapiens, or even the DMN committee, and we'll get back to you. So Tracy, do we have any questions?
Absolutely, Barbara, and thank you for that great webinar. I am going to start asking questions, and people, you have a few more minutes to pose your question to Barbara by using the question box to type your question. Barbara, our first question, what are the most important differences between the TDM and the DMN today to be aware of?
Okay, this is a good question to end with, because I've mentioned them as we went on, but I didn't create a slide to tell you. In my opinion, as a business analyst, I think that there are 5 differences. One is methodology. DMN does not come with a methodology, but I'm sure every vendor and every consulting company will have their own. But we have one, but that's one difference. But it includes a glossary. Our methodology includes that glossary because you don't get the richness without the glossary. The range of decisions, as you've seen, is a second one. DMN has a wide range of decisions. TDM has one, but it's very rigorous. The automation of decision models are different. Right now, Sapiens Decision and TDM, they use adapters to current technology. DMN is waiting for vendors to adopt the field language, and so far I pinged somebody today in our group and asked them, do we know of anybody who's doing that right now, and we do not. Science, of course. DMN doesn't have principles. TDM does. I do know for a fact that people who are out there trying to build their own set of principles for finding errors. So you will see more and more of that, but it's a difference right now. And then experience and production. TDM has a lot of production decision models out there. It will be a couple of years before we probably see the same number of production DMN models. But we certainly intend to see them, and at Sapiens, we're training our folks in DMN, and we'll use DMN for whatever we can use it for.
Excellent. Thank you, Barbara. Our next question comes from DJ. He works as a consultant with many different clients. Do you have a PC-based software package?
We do not. We do not have a PC-based software package. I know that there is something in the works that would be available to everyone, but I can't give you any details. So DJ, if you want to send me an email, I'll send it through to our roadmap people. So our idea, you got to think about, we started as building this big enterprise platform for major corporations. Now we realize that everybody wants to do this. So, we're wrestling as a company how to get it out there to everybody. And they do have an answer to that. I'm just not at liberty to share it now.
Great. Thank you, Barb.
Excellent question. Thank you I love those kinds of questions because I can feed them into our R&D folks.
Absolutely. Our next question comes from Robert. Are there plans to integrate DMN with UML?
I don't know. Robert. I'm sorry. If you just send me that email, I am not aware of any, but I'm not out in the field with the clients anymore, so I will ask that one. So Robert, if you want to send me an email, I'll send you the answer what our people are seeing out there.
Thank you. Our next question is from Matthew. How does your project support auditing of decisions and track changes?
Okay, that's a really good question, and it's a complicated answer. Our software actually is a full, it manages releases of software, and it manages versions of different pieces of decision models. So you can, like, for instance, copy a decision model and just change one or two of the tables, and it creates a new version. You can also create views. So I can have, let's say I have a view for a mortgage, let's say for a super conforming mortgage, and I have another decision model for a veteran going for a mortgage. They both come up with whether you're eligible or not, and they both look at the same things, the max LTV and the borrower and the product, but one is for veterans and one is for super conforming mortgages. So between views, versioning, and release management, it's not an easy answer, but we do it. There's one other thing I should mention that's kind of new, and that is being able to tie the original source documents, especially for regulatory requirements, and actually associating them with different parts of decision models and different places in them. So when that regulatory product or requirement changes, we know exactly where to go based on the input data. So that's another way we do it.
Excellent. Janet asks, how does I, as a consultant BA, get trained in TDM?
Okay, that's a really good question. The best place to start is with our book. It basically goes through all the principles and gives you some examples. And John, if you want to send me an email, there are a couple of universities actually that are offering training in TDM. I thought you were going to ask DMN. I was going to say that the best way for DMN is to get Bruce Silver's new book on DMN. He's really excellent. At some point in time we may see a Bruce Silver book on TDM, but I don't know that for sure. I'm just saying that would be a nice thing to have. If you are part of a project and you wanted training, we do have TDM training, and we would do it for a project. Of course, we do it for every project. So if you had a pilot or a project, Sapiens, I'm sure, would be more than happy to do the training. As an individual, it's a little bit harder.
Thank you, Barbara. We do have some more questions here. I'm going to try and get through one or two. Our next question is, what is the relationship of the DMN to BPMN? Thank you.
Oh, okay. DMN, well, politically they're different because the BPMN committee of OMG is not the same as the DMN committee, which is why the symbol in your BPMN model looks like a decision table, because that's the business rule icon for in BPMN. With TDM, we don't think of a task calling one decision table. We think of it calling a whole model, so that's why we use the octagon. So politically they're different groups, but the relationship really is that you put that little symbol in a task anywhere in your process model, and that separates the process model from the decision model. Your DMN model then would call the DMN model from that task. And so you'll see some DMN modeling coming from BPMN vendors.
Excellent. Thanks, Barbara. And one quick question. Dana asked, how are decision models being applied in life sciences?
Life sciences. I don't know. Again, another question to send to me, Dana. I know it's been in mortgage, it's been in banking, core banking, investment banking, healthcare, Obamacare. Don't know about the life sciences. May not be being used at this point. I don't know. But I will ask our folks and see.
Excellent, Barbara. Well, thank you very much. We are at our limit For those of you that are looking to contact Barbara and her team, just look at the chat box where there's some grabbable links for you. Barbara, thank you so much for today's presentation. It was a great and very informative webinar. And I'd like to thank all the audience for attending today. I'd like to remind you that today's webinar, including the PDF of the PowerPoint, as well as the video of the presentation, is being recorded and it will be archived at the ModernAnalyst.com website within a few business days. Thank you everyone for attending, and this concludes today's webinar. Have a great day.